A question that I've been seeing coming up a lot is why aren't there any new games recently, both multiplayer and single player? You've probably also noticed it, but if not, one of your friends probably has, and if you don't have any friends, a streamer or a YouTuber you watch has probably complained about it. Personally, my favorite streamer, Critical, has pretty much stopped playing games on stream for the most part because of the shortage. There's just nothing to play. And today I wanted to explain, or try to explain, why there's so few games coming out. I want to knock the elephant in the room out right away. COVID has obviously been impacting game development, especially games that were slated to come out in 2020 or 2021 are getting pushed back. That makes sense. However, that is not the sole reason that there's almost no games coming out right now, as games have been releasing from major studios during this time. Multiplayer and single player games both have their own issues right now, and I think I'm going to start with multiplayer games because it is a little bit easier to explain. Multiplayer games are at an all-time high as far as popularity is concerned, and when something gets big and more popular, it'll eventually become mainstream, making it incredibly popular and digestible among mass markets rather than just the niche it was initially trying to appeal to. I know this is probably an overused example, but there's a reason for that, and that example is Fortnite. Fortnite started life as a strange co-op zombie survival game intended for a very niche audience. However, when the game was reviewed averagely and selling poorly, they quickly hashed up a battle royale mode, taking inspiration from PUBG, which was massive within the gaming space at the time, but never caught on with a more mainstream audience. This was initially done in an effort to sell more copies of the co-op survival mode. However, luckily for them, that did not work out. In essence, it took a good concept that worked with people at the core of the medium and made it simpler and more graphically digestible, and just like that, you're playing on your phone in between classes with people who have never and will never own a console. This on its own is great as it brings people into the space and expands the market. However, expanding the market also means that you have to appeal to a wider audience, which means that you have to copy what your competition is doing to appeal to that wider audience, and in short, that's how we ended up with Forza Horizon Battle Royale. This relates back to games not coming out as fast because the model that has been presented as popular to mass audiences is live service games, a term worse to hardcore gamers than saying Hail Satan in the Vatican. Live service games also happen to be more profitable as money continues to flow in on updates that are easier to work on and faster to release than a whole nother $60 game. Essentially, multiplayer games are coming out at a slower rate because it's easier and more profitable for companies to make money on cosmetics while releasing updates over time to games that have already come out, and this is more popular because the market itself has expanded. On the other hand, single-player games are facing entirely different issues, and the reason that nothing has been coming out depends on which studio you're talking about. More generally, however, leaps in technology have made games slower to produce as there's more expected, and every major release is expected to be pushing the boundaries of modern consoles rather than just settling into what's already been done. And with the new generation recently releasing, it means that there's even more new tech to work with, which means that studios are going to be a little bit slower to pump their first games out for the systems. There's also an abundance of ambitious ideas, which on paper is a good thing, however, most of the time they end up not formulating at the end. Take, for example, Cyberpunk 2077. Even with 8 years of work, they still couldn't get the game to a playable state on console, and even on PC, where it worked better, glitches were abundant, and the world didn't deliver on the massive promises that were made. In reality, though, it was basically impossible to release what they were saying they wanted to, they just never admitted it. The same goes for plenty of ambitious games, and while some make it out with massive stories and consistency, such as Red Dead Redemption 2, many more fall by the wayside, which makes it feel like there's no games coming out. In terms of studio-specific issues, I'll get Sony out of the way right away, and that they are making games for PS5, but they're probably definitely a little bit behind. They want to make sure they're getting it right. I'm sure their single-player games are usually pretty good. Their multiplayer ones usually aren't so good, but they don't make many of those. Microsoft are in a pretty similar boat, except for the fact that they just don't make games anymore. They just buy new studios to make games for them. I don't really know what they've been doing all this whole time. They've just been like fucking around or something. They released an entire new console with no new games for it. I don't understand how that happens. Nintendo also have been doing nothing, and this is even more mind-boggling. I think they just overexerted themselves at the start of the Switch's life cycle to try to get more sales on it, and then realized that all of their studios made games 2 years ago, and now they can't just pump out another one so easily. The last studio-specific issue I'm going to cover is probably the funniest, and that's Ubisoft. Now, they have been releasing games for a while, but they actually stopped because of how bad the games were. I don't know if anybody remembers, but Watchdogs Legion came out, and the game was so fucking bad that Ubisoft literally delayed their entire release slate to try to make the games not suck before they released them. Now, granted, Watchdogs alone wasn't enough to do this, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back. They'd been getting away with some real shit for a while, and finally a game didn't sell very well, so they took a look back at themselves. However, that hasn't stopped them from making some real dog shit.